Join Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, on a journey into creativity and transformation. Each episode, Marc and his guests explore the intersection of science and spirituality to uncover ways to live a more inspired life. Together, we'll navigate both the seen and unseen realms to spark joy and personal growth. This is a community where you are empowered to discover the diamond within. Marc is an award-winning psychic medium, decorated veteran, and teacher based in Seattle. Using his intuitive gifts, he guides the curious on profound soul adventures. Now, here is your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector.
All right, hello, prospecting friends, and welcome to another episode of Inspired Living. I'm your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, and I'm so thrilled to have you back and tuning in as I guide you and fellow prospectors on what I like to call soul adventures, filled with creativity, curiosity, education, encouragement, inspiration, mindfulness, motivation, manifestations, visions, and a whole lot of spiritual awesomeness. Here in this episode of Inspired Living, we will present content, stories, and interviews that will offer you a chance to ignite your dreams and your passions, explore your curiosities, thoughts, and ideas while we embrace the many wonders of both the extraordinary and the ordinary, the paranormal and the normal, along with what at first may appear as science fiction that we know eventually becomes science facts. And together through this show, we will uncover the unique diamonds within each of us while discovering and revealing the many hidden gems waiting to shine in our lives, our journey, and the human experience. Inspired Living is all about building a supportive community that celebrates every victory, big or small, and each episode features incredible guests like the one we have today, who have faced challenges, loss, failure, defeat, but have persevered and pursued their passions, their goals, and motivations to make a positive impact in their respective fields and make our world a much better place. Expect engaging discussions, diverse perspectives, thought-provoking questions, and actionable steps to transform inspiration into your own reality. Of course, I always want to say a huge thank you to all of our inspired listeners around the globe. Your support through listening, downloading, subscribing, leaving reviews has made Inspired Living a top choice for inspiration, introspection, and spirituality. And we are always truly humbled, grateful, and appreciate each and every one of you. So keep leaving those reviews and keep enjoying the shows. If you haven't subscribed, liked, or followed us yet, there's still time. You can connect with us over on our Facebook page, Inspired Living. You can also follow us over on Instagram, Blue Sky, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Just look for the handle Inspired for us. That's the number 4. Or you can check us out through our YouTube channel, Inspired Living, where we're also streaming through Audible and through Alexa, or wherever you enjoy your favorite podcast shows. We are streaming through most of those platforms today. And of course, we're coming to you live through Om Times Television. So if you want to give us a like, a follow, or you want to continue to listen to amazing shows like we have today, we're going to be focused on a little history, which I think is interesting given the times. But I always like to say that you are both the inspiration and the inspired. So let's embrace this journey together. Let's inspire others, and let's make every moment count before we expire. And I hope that you'll enjoy this next episode of Inspired Living. So our guest today is Alan Winters. He's coming to the show for the first time. And there we go. He's a novelist, he's a historian, he's an academic, and he likes to bring the past into urgent conversations with the present moment, which I found fascinating. So when my team scheduled Alan, I'm such a huge World War II history buff. I've traveled the world to some of the locations. And so when I was shown these books that Alan has written, I wanted to have him come on and share this with the Inspired Living community. So just a little bit about Alan's journey and his work. He is like I said, he's an accomplished novelist, he's a historian, and he's an academic who brings the past into urgent conversation with the present. He is a graduate of Rutgers with honors in history, with advanced degrees from NYU and Columbia. He has authored 7 novels, including collaborations with former federal judge Herbert J. Stern. His screenplay, Polly, earned recognition at the Austin Film Festival, while Savior's Day was named a Kirkus Best Book Selection. Alongside his literary career, Alan has published over 20 scientific articles and serves on the faculty of Long Island University. He is known for blending deep historical research with compelling storytelling. And he writes stories that both educate and challenges readers to confront uncomfortable truth. And what better way to come on Inspired Living and have these conversations? If you want to learn about Alan, you can go to alanwinter.com. And Alan, welcome to Inspired Living for the first time. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for coming on. And we're going to do a little history today. So I haven't done a history show in a couple seasons, so I'm excited to talk about these books. You've written several books, but today we're going to be specifically talking about your new book. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, so just share with us a little bit of your background. Hopefully I covered most of it in the bio. If I missed something, please
You did cover it the way I've presented it, but I'm going to share something that I don't share with anybody normally. And that this is a complete curveball. So I don't want to start your program with a complete curveball, but I hope you're.
I love that.
Okay, so here's the pitch. I've had two careers, and I've had two careers that have followed each other in parallel. I didn't end one and start another where you might hear someone was a lawyer, then a banker, then something else. I was a periodontist. So I went to dental school. I'm a surgeon. And at the same time that I was a surgeon, I was the editor of a dental journal. I wrote that's where the scientific papers come in from. But I had a passion for history. I was nominated for a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship when I was in college, but I wanted to go to dental school, so I turned that down. And so I actually ended up doing both things. They're both my passions. The road to those are, pitted with a lot of different barriers and things, but I made it. And so what's happened is I found that I developed a passion for creative writing later. I never wanted to be a novelist, but I did. And then I found that I could bring my history in, as you so aptly described, and teach lessons. So my books all teach things. At least that's the goal of it. I don't just write for the sake of writing. So that sort of sums it up a little bit. And everything is built on facts that are very little known or not known. And then I expand on that. And what happens when you do the deep research, which is what I enjoy, you find more facts that people don't know, and you string them together, and all of a sudden you've got a compelling story. So that's how these books were created.
Yeah, and congratulations on being recognized for your work too. And a lot of times when I talk with guests for the first time, they do have two lives, a former life, myself included. Long before I did the work I do today and podcasting and writing, I had a former life in the U.S. Coast Guard and federal service for almost 25 years. So now doing completely opposite stuff of what I was doing. But tell us about this. So this is the third in a trilogy of books that you have written. It's your sixth novel. But let's talk about the books that actually tied to World War II and that storytelling. Like I said, I'm a huge history buff. I've actually gone to France and stood on the beaches of Normandy. I've gone through the Winston Churchill bunker. So I don't know what the fascination with World War II is, but when my team said that we're going to have you on, I was like, hey, this is very, very interesting. But you would tie it to today's storytelling and some of the truths. So tell us a little bit about how you put this trilogy together based on a soldier from World War II, kind of maybe go back to the first two before we cover the third book.
So this is really what happened, and I think it's important to know the beginning of this. I had already published 4 novels when a dear friend and patient came to me, Herb Stern, as you mentioned earlier. And Herb came to me and said, let's write a book together about Adolf Hitler. And I looked at him, goes back about 8-9 years ago. I said, Herb, what could we possibly say that is different, that hasn't been said? There has to be 1 million books written on Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And in his inimitable way said, you'd be surprised. Let's have dinner. So we had dinner. We happened to live close to each other in New Jersey. And so we had dinner, and he said, I'm going to start with the first thing. Did you know that Adolf Hitler was in a mental institution at the end of World War I? I said, I was a history major, but no, I really didn't know that. Well, he was. So that was the hook that got me going to have the dinner. Then we started to explore this. And the deeper we explored this, we began to look at the history books that described the beginning of the Nazi Party, how Hitler formed it, how events led up to when he became chancellor. And what we found was history book after history book after history book tended to omit or just ignore, they ignored the facts, or they said they didn't exist. And they basically censored it. So really what Herb and I found when we started this project was that historians, by and large, and this is a big generalization because you'll find exceptions to what I'm about to say, but by and large, censored what they were writing about Adolf Hitler. They censored how he came to power, and they distorted how the Germans handled all of the 1930s going into the 40s, which is what the books span. And we can amplify that as we go forward and talk. But we really got our hackles up, quite honestly, in that if these are noted historians, these were knighted historians from England and Pulitzer Prize winners, and said, really, they didn't read the original stuff? And we hired translators. We went to the original archives, and we began to piece together what we feel were the true facts of how really World War II, A, started, and B, how it could have been averted.
Yeah, and as a student of history myself, I come across this a lot for the fact that I read something and then start to do that deeper research like you're talking about, and then I realize, well, history wasn't actually accurate or wasn't telling me the whole truth. So they always say history is written by those that win the war, right? And I don't remember who said it. It might have been Winston Churchill.
Churchill said this.
Okay, I get a lot of quotes in my brain and then I throw them out, but I can't always remember exactly. So I paraphrase, or I always tell the inspired listening, inspired living audience to go, check my work, look it up or whatever. But it's, as I've gotten older, I've realized a lot of our history that we've been told is actually not accurate. So thank you for bringing it up. And I always tell people, if you're interested in a topic or a subject, go do your research and get it from, many different perspectives, not just from one. We have, technology today with the internet. We have information right at our fingertips that can go pretty much anywhere in the world. But there is a lot of things that just aren't accurately reflected. And we actually have a pretty dark history, even here in America, with our, our foundations. So it doesn't surprise me. And I did know that Adolf Hitler was in a mental institute, after World War I. He was just, I believe he was a private in World War I and came back home and really started this movement. A lot of people don't realize even during the 30s, when he was coming to power through the National Party today, he had a 90% approval rating. And you look back at that and you're like, how can somebody that did so much damage and so much evil could have such an approval rating in Germany? And those are things that are just not mentioned from a historical standpoint. So it's interesting. Napoleon had talked about history is a set of lies agreed upon. Right. So thank you for pointing it out and doing this research on this book. So kind of just backtracking for those that are tuning into the live TV format or catch this on the encore on the podcast format. This third book is the trilogy that began with Wolf and then the Sins of the Fathers. And it's been a decade in the making. And now we're talking about your new book, When Ashes Cried. Tell me and the listening audience about the title, When Ashes Cried. I thought it was a pretty interesting title. Just kind of get
When Ashes Cried is sort of the summation of the whole story of the character, and we should go back to that character in a minute, and explain why he's important. But the title itself came. I like titles that put words together that normally don't go together. Blackboard Jungle, as an example, would be one. Armies in the Night, things like that. But there's a cynicism, and I have to admit it this way. It's not necessarily a book written with hope and an uplifting thing. If you're talking about the coming of the Holocaust and what happened during World War II, and what I was able to do was really think long and hard about anti-Semitism, about the victims of the war as it occurred, and did we learn anything from it? did we learn? And then you look, if you jump to what happened on October 7th of 2023 in Gaza and Israel and whatever happened there, without getting into the politics of it, it certainly wasn't that far fetched from what the Nazis were doing in terms of murdering and what happened. And we can talk about the causes of that, because in essence, that was one of the things that I learned from Herb Stern in terms of connecting dots. And it's very important to understand that. But the bottom line is, have we actually learned any lessons? And when ashes cried, if things got so bad metaphorically that ashes can cry, then what has man learned? And I think that's where the title came from.
Okay. Yeah, and you're right, because as time goes on, right, the younger generations don't necessarily tie into the past or past wars, or how they got to where they're at today and the freedoms they enjoy, right? So we're seeing a lot of that in current real time in our current human consciousness. And it's always a reminder. We always talk about never again, but yet here we have ripple effects. And I think it was Mark Twain that talked about that history doesn't actually repeat itself the exact same way, but it does have a rhyme and a rhythm. And what I see today going on reminds me a lot of the late 1920s, early 30s in Germany, that eventually in 36 led to the start of World War II with the invasion of Poland. So a lot of people forget about history, and we're due to repeat it if we don't remember history. So that's why I was excited to have you on the show today, Alan, and talk about this. So let's give a little back story, because I have a little bit about this amnesiac German soldier, Friedrich Richard, whose story begins in Wolf and then continues on with the trilogy Sins of Our Fathers, and then today's show we're talking about When Ashes Cried.
Right. All right. So what Herb and I did. And let me explain, if I can, a little bit about Herb, because it's important to understand it directed where these books were going. I was a novelist and he is a lawyer. He was involved in the Malcolm X assassination. He was the prosecutor from New Jersey that literally put the mafia away in New Jersey, or most of them. And he's got a stellar career, and he'd written a number of books, and he was made Judge of Berlin in 1979 through the State Department in a hijacking case. So he was intimately involved with German law and German history. That's another story, but that was called Judgment in Berlin. And what Herb and I did was we started to connect the dots, which were, if Hitler, as you're aware that he was in a mental institution, but most people weren't, what other things weren't there? How are we going to tell this story from a vantage point of the German point of view? Not that we are championing the German point of view, but we wanted clarity. So we invented a amnesiac soldier from World War I. He was near a bomb exploding, all kinds of harm came to, injuries, and he was put back together and patched together. We had him by a famous plastic surgeon, but he lost his memory. So because he lost his memory, we had this unique character that was sent to a mental ward, the same one that Hitler was in the bed next to Hitler, helping Hitler, who was blind, who couldn't see. That was his claim. He was not organically blind, but psychologically blind, but he still couldn't see until his sight came back. That in and of itself is a story. And they became friends. Friedrich's memory never came back. So he is looking at, as the World War I ends, where to go, what to do, and he ends up going to Munich to be with his friend because he doesn't have a family. He has no memory of anything, but he's also not anti-Semitic. He has no values. He has no moral compass that's good or bad. And he becomes the eyes and ears of the reader. He becomes history as we uncovered it, as accurately as we uncovered it, from the inside looking out. And that gave us a window that most books don't have with any topic, realistically. But it allowed us not to be biased as much as humanly possible and to show the German point of view. And as an example, you mentioned yourself a few minutes ago about Hitler's ratings and how favorable they were. Well, you have to have a picture of Germany in the 1920s. When they ended the war, the average German lived on 1,100 calories a day during World War I. 1,100 calories. They didn't have enough food. This was a hungry country. They weren't allowed parts for their farm implements, for their machinery and factories. They had embargoes for everything. And all of a sudden, you get this guy Hitler coming along, and we can talk if you want about how he got involved with the political party in the first place. But he comes along and he's got his people beginning to have soup kitchens and provide food and provide money for people who are indigent. And he begins to pull up by the bootstraps, literally and figuratively, the German people, to the point where by the middle of the 1930s, they are the only country that gets out of the Great Depression. And that he got his people fed. He brought this. Now, I'm not saying this as a Germophile, a Germanophile, if you could say it that way. But what I'm saying is that he did such positive things, as you indicated, that he was beloved for the good that he did. And then the things that might view as bad or not desirable, people look the other way. And that's really part of the books, the tipping points for all of that. So that's Friedrich. Friedrich becomes the important character who tells the whole story.
Yeah, that's and just for the audience, Friedrich Richard is a fictional character, but you did a good job of weaving him in through real historical events alongside real historical figures. When you became a writer, and we'll forgive you for going to Rutgers because they're now a rival of my University of Washington now that we're in the same division.
Right.
Did you realize that you would start to weave fictional characters into real historical figures or real historical storytelling, because why is fiction necessary to tell this story, I guess is what I'm wondering about these.
Well, there's actually two questions there. They're not the same question. The first one is, yes, I not only wanted to, my goal was to teach, as I said earlier. And so I wove real people, real events. Our books are so accurate that there were comments in Wolf and Sins of the Father that they could have been used as textbooks in both high school and college. They're appropriate for both of them. But they're fiction because we have a protagonist who's fiction. So why did we do that? Well, here's the real answer. If you look at the world of publishing and the economics of publishing, you have to have certain credentials. Herb is a lawyer, right, and I'm a dentist. And I don't have a PhD in history. I have a bachelor's in history, but I don't have so my doctorate, if you will, is dentistry. And so because of that does not give us the verisimilitude or the reality that the publishers want for an author of this topic. And we don't have the legitimacy that they want to promote a book because we don't have the credentials. So it's all about our credentials. We had the credentials to write a historical novel, of course. So we had no choice but to do it this way. We would have liked to have done it as nonfiction, but the publisher just sort of smacked us down and said, no, it's not going to happen. So that's sadly what happened. But I'm proud of it because these books hold up. And I've had friends, I can't believe this. I looked at this, I looked at that, I Googled this. Everything is accurate in these books, except the character who tells the story.
The character, yeah. And I thought it was just a brilliant way to weave that into history and kind of, maybe it's a good way to reinvest and get interest to the younger generations, right? Like I said, a lot of these younger generations behind us don't have any, connection to D-Day or World War II or the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan. It's just, it's 80 some years ago and they just don't have. And so, these books, I think could, give some interesting insight and recall that history. So one of the things that I loved what you said, Alan, you said, quote, "I was meant to study history. I love learning about the past to understand the present. I love talking what might be seemingly desperate facts and weaving them into tales about the human spirit. This passion enables me to craft meaningful stories that by turns engage, teach, and entertains readers while jumping off today's headlines," end quote. And when I read that, I was like, that's a lot of what I do. I have this show for that exact reason. I think, history is a great teacher for all of us. And, I love learning, about the past. And that's a big reason why I wanted to have you on the show to talk about this. So for people listening or watching the show, where's some places that besides, Alan Winter's winter.com, where else can they go start to get these books? Audio? Are there audio books or physical books, digital books? Kind of give that format real quick.
Okay, it's real. All of the books are softback. Both Wolf and When Ashes Cried are hardback as well. They're all ebooks. They're on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Thrift a Million, or whatever it's called. Wherever you get books, these books are available. Audio, I think the only audio is Sins of the Fathers in terms of audio. So people have to read them, is what it amounts to.
Well, and that's interesting you say that, because we're also, studies are showing that people are reading less, right? More people are now starting to move to the audio formats and listening to storytelling and not reading as much as the younger generations. I still do a lot of reading myself, but maybe one day you'll have somebody famous do a voiceover for some of your books. Somebody famous.
Well, it would be
somebody
nice.
like it's got.
It would be nice, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Please continue.
I was going to say something that I have a thing with audio. To me, if someone says, I read your book, I listened to it while I was driving, that's not reading a book.
Yeah.
And to me, audio, which is perfectly fine for entertainment and what someone is doing, that's like putting all your food in a blender and drinking it, and I had a great meal. No, you had a drink. And it's the same ingredients. Reading a book and looking at the rhythm, listen to the cadences, looking at the lyrical, tone of, if you will, absorbing the words and going back and look at them again and see how it's structured. That's reading. To me, that's reading. So it's not quite the same. They're both entertainment. I will not take it away from them, but it's not quite the same. It really isn't.
Yeah, no, I listened to a book or I read a book, and it just, time's speeding up. So I like that concept of putting it in a blender and getting it quicker, because that's a lot of the younger generations too, always on the move. And science is actually teaching us that time is actually speeding up. So very interesting. So we're going to cut to our first commercial, our first and only commercial. And when we come back, we're going to pick up this conversation with our guest today, Alan Winter, with his series of books. We're talking about a whole bunch of books. But he's a novelist, he's a historian, he's an academic, he's a dentist, he's got a lot of education behind him. But stick around, we're going to continue this journey and this conversation down the historical path with Mr. Alan Winter, our guest today here on Inspired Living. And as Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us, we are not makers of history, we are made by history. Stick around, you won't want to miss the second part of this show.
Times TV. Billions of people walk this earth, yet there is only one you. Life offers endless connections, lessons, and moments of awakening. Are you ready to explore the beauty of this world, the healing energy that surrounds you, and your own soul adventure? Marc Lainhart, known as the Intuitive Prospector, is a trusted guide on that path. An internationally recognized psychic medium, medical intuitive, and spiritual advisor, Marc blends experience with heart-centered insight. From decorated veteran and first responder to teacher, minister, author, podcast host, and mentor, his journey has been one of service and discovery. His mission is simple: to help you awaken, heal, grow, and uncover the diamond within while discovering the hidden gems life has placed around you. Dare to explore. Dare to rise. Learn more at marclainhart.com and discover the Intuitive Prospector online.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
And welcome back to Inspired Living. Our guest today is Alan Winter. He is an accomplished novelist. He is a historian, an academic who brings the past into urgent conversations with the present. Welcome back, Alan, and thanks for being a guest on today's show as we go down memory lane, or history, if you will. Wanted to open up the second half of the show, a quote from the late, great John F. Kennedy, who says this, quote, "History is a relentless master. It has no present, only the past rushing into the future. To try to hold fast is to be swept aside," end quote. And I feel like with everything going on in today's society and forgetting about our past, which you may end up repeating because we didn't learn from our past, these books, what do you feel has been the most transformative for writing these books and connecting with the outside world on this fictional character, but being it told through actual events through World War II and the rise of Hitler to, do what he did as history, tells us?
Well, I think there's two major points I can bring out, and then the problem is I could talk about this for hours. The first point is that in writing these books and doing this research, and honestly, I'm with these books almost every day. I'm writing a fourth book. I actually finished the fourth one, which is not part of a trilogy, obviously, but it's a spin-off of this as well. I have become very skeptical of history books as they are so posed without further checking everything. And it got very upsetting to me, having been, a history major and loving it, to, like, as an example, following a footnote from one book, it's quoted in another historian's book, and it was a mistake. And that mistake was then quoted again and again and again. They don't bother to do their research, a lot of them. Now, I'm making generalities. Someone could say, well, that's not true. This one did it accurately. But the bottom line is it taught me to not take anything on surface value. And that goes for news, it goes for news broadcasts, it goes for announcements by the government. I don't care who's in office. It has nothing to do with party or politics per se. I became a skeptic when I really wasn't one to begin with. So in that regard, it made a difference for me going forward. And the books will teach that, because we then have, and this aside to that, in Wolf, and by the way, Wolf was a nickname that Adolf Hitler used for himself when he was dating women, and signed one of his paintings, Wolf. It comes from his name, Adolf. Yeah, it comes from Adolf. And we have online, it's called Notes on Wolf, 115 pages of research. We put all our research out there. So that's another website, Notes on Wolf, 115 pages. There's about 40 pages in Sins of the Father. All of our research notes are there to explain where this is coming from. And not just it's off the top of our heads, because you could think fiction is not truthful. The other thing that is important that we found is that what the historians did say about the German people, and what I heard as a young boy growing up, was my father would never buy a Mercedes-Benz. Don't buy a German car. I mean, and we're Jewish. So, I began to hear all of these tropes, if you will, and fair's fair. In other words, is that accurate? Is that true? I mean, did the German people, as a population, support what the Nazis were doing? And you find out through our books and our research that Sins of the Fathers is about a coup that was supposed to take place in September of 1938. They sent by the German military. The German military leaders did not want Hitler to advance. So this is sugar-coated by a lot of the historians at different levels of how they handle this. But at the end of the day, they formed a resistance. They sent emissaries to FDR. They sent them to Chamberlain. They sent them to Sweden and to Switzerland and to Daladier in France, all of which saying, please, we just want one thing. Get on the radio and make a statement to Hitler. This is in 1937, 38. If you're going to go into Czechoslovakia, there's going to be war. And the basis for that is that Czechs had a non-aggression pact with France, that if they were attacked, France would come to the aid of the Czechs. And the same was with Poland, by the way. And that England would then back up France because they were allies. And so all they wanted, and the real one that they wanted was Chamberlain. So they lobbied him, they wanted him to help, and he wouldn't do it. His ambassador to Berlin said, don't do it. We don't know who these people are, but he actually loved Hitler. He loved the Nazis. This is the British ambassador to Berlin in the 30s, Neville Henderson. So the bottom line, without getting into a whole long story, is Chamberlain turns them away. He doesn't meet with them. Churchill does, but he has no power in 1938. And they decide, all right, we're going to pull the coup anyway. September 28th is the day. We're going to have the coup. We're going to overthrow Hitler. If that happened, there wouldn't have been World War II. And what does Chamberlain do in September? He flies to Munich, and you have the appeasement and the Munich Accord. He knew that the resistors were going to overthrow the government. He knew it. And he took the wind out of the sails because he allegedly then averted a war. Appeasement, with that famous waving the paper saying peace in our time, peace for our time. So what we learned out of all this research is you got to dig into the facts. We read original history books that were written right after World War II in the 50s, the 60s, people that interviewed people who were still alive. Those books are completely different than the books that are coming out in the last 30, 40 years. And when you go to those sources, that's where you get the truths. And we learned all of that and put it all in as best we could to get this message that I'm sharing now in our books. And it's there to be had.
Yeah, and I love it. And because it would be, if that was 38, then it'd be just a few years later that we would actually enter the war with, Pearl Harbor, and war, not just with Germany, but the Pacific War with Japan. But out of that horrible time frame where millions and millions of people died, it also gave us NATO. It gave us Article 5, right? You go attack one, you attack all, kind of to today, which I think is important for today's current society to understand that it's important to have allies, because it keeps us now out of another. Hopefully we don't have a World War III. Because of that Article 5 and the presence of NATO, but you never know, right? But at least some good came out of that horrible situation. And in the books, you talk about one of the recurring themes in the trilogy is that evil rarely arrives all at once. It advances incrementally, and why it's important to show through these talking points about how small compromises that at that time, and there was a lot of compromises at that time. Can lead to larger injustices like the genocide that we, eventually learned after the war, after the Allies, started to win in Berlin and take back the country. But as far as, indifferences can be dangerous as well. And I think those are good reminders for this generation, to reflect back again. The past can really be a great teacher for all of us. And I like I said, it was fun to look through these books and be like, oh, this is a very interesting way to make history come alive, but give some insight to, again, I'm just more focused on the younger generations because they don't seem to have really an insight or passion for, not everybody, but a lot of them don't have a real insight or interest in history. And I think that's a little scary because we can, we can redo or repeat things that we should have learned from when we said never again after World War II. But you also talk about, democracies are more fragile than we can imagine. And I was curious if you wanted just to talk about those 3 points about how small compromises can lead to larger injustices. Indifferences can be dangerous, And democracies are more fragile. Democracy is a test. We forget about that too. It's a way of life here in the United States. But I was just having a conversation with a colleague. I don't know if it's the United States of America anymore because we're so big. People, almost equate us like Europe now because we can go to a different state. We don't need a passport to go there, but it's a completely different way of looking at, life. I can go 3 states over and it's a completely different way of looking at life, just like it is in Europe. So I'm not sure the United States is still the United States of America because we're so big. But talk to the audience real quick about those 3 important points, because I think that's what you really bring through in the books, is talking about recurring themes of evil.
Absolutely. Well, but they don't start off as evil. That's the whole point.
Right.
They start off as a change in your personal freedoms, your rights. And if you go to the Nazis, and let's talk about that specifically, and then we can broaden it a little bit. But what happened? In other words, how did the German people, who were probably the most intelligent, most sophisticated, most cultured people in all of Europe at that time, how did they allow their freedoms to be taken away from them in a systematic, step-by-step way, to the point where all of a sudden they turned around and they were gone? How did that happen? And what are the tipping points that we should be aware of right now? And I'll see if I can't make that into a cohesive thought. So, Hitler is appointed. First of all, there's no myth. He was never elected chancellor. He was appointed chancellor. That's the way the German government worked. The president was elected by the people. It was von Hindenburg, who was a war hero from World War I. He appoints the chancellor, and he did it because he felt the Nazis, that they looked at him as a buffoon. They thought Hitler was going to, as a joke. He looked funny with that little mustache and all the goose stepping and all the arm signs, the signals, etc. And they thought they would get rid of him. Why did they think they'd get rid of him? Well, but they had 15, from 1918 to 1933, they had 15 chancellors and 13 cabinets. So they had 60, this is important to understand, 60 political parties. So they had to, just like in England would be, they would have to get a coalition together to get a majority of anything. And every time they didn't do it, they'd have to get another chancellor who would then try and cobble together another coalition. And that's why they had so many chancellors. And so they figured, let's make Hitler a chancellor. He won't last very long, and we'll get rid of these Nazis, because they had gotten more votes in 1928. They ran again in 32 and lost votes, maybe 37% at that point. That's all the Nazis got. And they figured, let's get rid of this guy. Well, that's where they made a mistake. Okay, but that's an error in judgment. So they make Hitler, appoint him chancellor. He serves at the pleasure of the president. And what happens within 30 days is the Reichstag fire. Someone burns the parliament down. It happens to be a young Dutch communists. But there had been talk that there would be a fire, possibly at the Reichstag, possibly someplace else, to get a workers' revolt around the world. Remember, you had the Bolsheviks in 1917. You had communism is starting to raise its head. And the West is very afraid of the Bolsheviks. Why? Because it's going to give all of their wealth to the commoners. They're going to disperse their estates, their wealth. And that's what happened in Russia in 1917. And the more the Russians wanted to look westward, the more the West wanted to say, hey, you stay there. So one of the things, and jumping ahead just as a thought, one of the things could have been maybe Chamberlain and the French, they wanted Hitler in place as a buffer to Stalin as they went forward later on. And they figured he would be the barrier to prevent the Russians coming until the war started. But that's another story. So what happens is the Reichstag fire occurs. They get the Reichstag fire decree, which then gets rid of habeas corpus. You cannot have free assembly anymore. It cannot have freedom of the press anymore. And this is in February and March of 1933. They then pass, they say, well, wait a second, let's get rid of the communists because the communists did it. They end up finding out that it wasn't the German communists at all, had nothing to do with anything. But by that time, they had passed the Enabling Act and allowed kicked all of the communists out of the Reichstag. This is important, and this is what allowed Hitler to go forward, because when they got rid of the communists in the Reichstag, it changed the numbers he needed for a plurality of a vote. And he still had to have an alliance with a Catholic Center Party. But at the end of the day, he needed 1 or 2 alliances. He didn't need 58 of them. And that allowed them to then suspend, basically, the Reichstag no longer from 34 or 33, March of 33, could no longer make laws. So just think of our own Congress. If there was a point that they said our Congress could no longer make laws, they would be there, but they wouldn't do anything. And the cabinet, in terms of the Nazis, the cabinet made all the laws. And the cabinet just rubber stamped whatever Hitler wanted. So that was an abrogation of the rights of the people. All right, you begin to adjust and you live. So one of the lessons here, going back to the question, is the German people began to adjust. Now, who are they arresting? Everybody who's against Hitler. Well, it becomes the socialists, it becomes the communists, then it becomes the Jehovah's Witnesses because they don't believe in saluting and making pledges of allegiance to anybody. It becomes not the Jews. The Jews had nothing to do with this at this time. They were not against them unless it was a Jewish liberal editor of a newspaper, or if it was a homosexual, because all the homosexuals were against the law, or the gypsies were against the law. And so this had nothing to do with the Jews in the early years whatsoever. And the tipping point would be what happened to the German people at that point in 33, 34, 35, the racial laws come in, the Nuremberg racial laws. And it's just for the Jews. So one of the great quotes of all time, and you're quoting really good ones, Mark, is by Martin Niemöller. Martin Niemöller was the head of the confessing church. So one of the things Hitler did immediately was basically, he didn't ban religion, but he banned the organized congregating of religions. And he wanted to create a Nazi evangelical Protestant church. So he wanted a Nazi church. And he drove all of the other churches underground. And they formed a sub-rasa, if you will, confessing church. That's what it was called. And the head of that was Martin Niemöller. A more common name would be Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They just made a documentary on Netflix. You can see that. And these were 4,000 ministers and pastors who got together and kept religion going underground, if you will, in Germany. But what Niemöller said, and this is pertinent to what we're discussing, he said, when they came for the unionists, I wasn't a unionist, so I didn't say anything. And when they came for the socialists, I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't say anything. And when they came for me, there was no one left to speak up for me. And that's the whole point, because one of the things is that if you don't speak up, if you don't lobby in whatever makes someone comfortable to lobby when they see injustice, when they see people being mistreated, however that is and whoever it may be, then you are helping the aggressor. And Desmond Tutu was the one who actually said to say nothing is to help the aggressor. And that is one of the key stories of our trilogy, are the people who didn't say, but who did say, and what's amazed me when we started this project, were the German military, the generals. They all spoke up. And so there was a very important meeting on November 5th, and this is a little side story, but I think it's important to understand because it's happened in the last few years to us meaning America. In November 5th of 1937, it's 4 years into the Nazi regime. The embargoes from World War I are still carried out. They still can't get farm equipment replacements or parts. The same for industrial machinery. And the army now, Hitler has rejuvenated the Luftwaffe against the Treaty of Versailles. He wasn't supposed to do it. No one said a word. He gets the Air Force going. He starts conscription all over again. Wasn't allowed to do that. He did it. They had 100,000 people in the army based on the Versailles Treaty. That's all they could have. 95,000 soldiers, 5,000 officers. He starts conscription. But they don't have enough ore, steel, rubber, anything that they needed to make weaponry. They just didn't have it. So there's an infighting with the generals in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. They meet with Hitler on November 5th, 1937, and they say, look, you have to help divide up the raw materials. We can't do what you want. We can't build enough airplanes and submarines, etc. And Hitler says, that's not what this meeting's about. And this is key to the whole thing. He said, that's not what this meeting's about. We're going to have a policy called Liebestrom. Liebestrom is expansion. And we are going to expand eastward, not west, where France and Belgium and Netherlands and England are, and Scandinavia. We're going to go east to the Slavic countries. And we are going to take whatever we need. We're going to start with Austria, and then we're going to go into Czechoslovakia. We're going to take their treasuries. We're going to take their food. We're going to take their raw materials. And we estimate 10, 20 million people are going to die. And then we're going to start a war, and we're going to go march onto Russia. This was said in 1937. It was memorialized in what's called the Hossback Memorandum. Hossback, Hossback. He was an adjuvant to Hitler. He took notes afterwards when Hitler said, don't write anything down. It's online, you can find it. I think the original's at the Yale Library, or a copy of it is at the Yale Library. But what he then said, and so at this meeting, the head of the War Department, Blomberg, Werner von Blomberg, the head of the Chief of Staff of the Army, his name was Fritsch. There was the head of Foreign State, Konstantin Neurath. They were all there and said, you can't do this. You cannot make war on these people. And they knew it would be a two-front war. So they said, no, we're not going to do this. So what did Hitler do very quickly is he then, by 3 months later, got rid of every one of the military leaders that said you shouldn't go to war. We're going to lose, and it's not right. He got rid of 13 top generals. He got rid of 44 junior generals, so that he then had a complacent military that would just do what he wanted them to do. And so the changes in administrations, that's something we should pay attention to. The tipping points, and I'll finish with one thing, and I know we'll run out of time. Yesterday in New York, there was a congressman who was in a primary, Dan Goldman, who lost. This is in the New York Times, in the New York papers. He went for a cup of coffee and they wouldn't serve him because of his beliefs on Israel. This is in New York City, which is a Jewish-oriented place. They wouldn't serve him coffee. Is that a tipping point to be concerned? I think it is. I'm going to stop right there.
Yeah, and Alan, I think it's always so much to try to get all this, in an hour, right? There's just so much history and so much we could talk about. Love to have you come back on Inspired Living and kind of continue the storytelling and be kind of maybe our residential historian to, put this ripple effect out through this platform if you're interested. But just for the sake of time for the listening audience, some of the things that this book and this trilogy of books and all the great books that Alan has written up to this point, you talked about not just about, the rise of Hitler and this fictional character, but you also talked about the victims and the perpetrators. You talked about the resistance. You talked about Valkyrie. You talked about the assassination attempts, because there was a lot over the course of his period. But some of the main talking points that I saw from this book was moral courage exists even in dark times. Resistance took many forms across the spectrum. And you talk about how people who choose compassion and empathy, because I always close my shows with, be kind, caring, and compassionate to one another. And then just researching the Holocaust, which is, again, that's probably could be a whole nother show of going deep down that research of, on the Holocaust and those that stood up. But you also talk about your journey about storytelling as a witness, right? And education through narrative is very, very important. And the danger of forgetting. You bring these up, and I believe I see a lot of similarities in our current times with history past, and the danger of forgetting is very, very dangerous. And I'd love to have you come back on Inspired Living. Reach out to my team, please, and continue these conversations, because I think it's important to have a historical perspective as well, if that's something that you're interested in doing. And thank you so much for being on the show, coming on and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your background. I'd love to speak with you again, because I find these topics very fascinating and very important for our time, especially through everything that's going on in the world.
I'd love to do it. I'd be honored to do it, and I've got a lot more to say. So,
yeah,
and it's important. So thank you. I'd love to do it.
Yeah, my pleasure, my friend. And again, thank you for all you're doing. Keep up the inspiration. Keep inspiring people. Keep writing. Keep storytelling, because there's going to be a lot of things in our history that we need to be reminded of, because I do think it is, the danger of forgetting is very similar to what I feel like we're in that tipping point right now. Like you said, you can't even get a cup of coffee in New York City because of your beliefs, and that's very, very dangerous. So thank you, Alan. Again, if you want to learn more about Alan Winter, you can go to alanwinter.com. Just get on the internet, type up. You can go to all of our social media pages where we have his bio and all the links to his books. Make sure to check out these books. Check out this podcast. We'll have him back on to continue talking about the historical journey. And so we'll close with a quote from the famous Abraham Lincoln, which I think is very important. With malice, quote, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in and to bind up the nation's wound, end quote. And that is by the great Abraham Lincoln. So until our next show, until our next podcast, until our next connection together, be kind, be caring, be compassionate in whatever you do. And most importantly, dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live. You'll discover the diamond within. You'll also discover the many hidden gems that are all around us. So thank you for tuning in to Inspired Living, and we'll see you next time here on Own Times Television.